All right. Okay. So let's kickstart today's lecture. All right. So today's lecture will be a little short. If you notice that the slides only have 14 pages or 14 slides, so there won't be too much to cover. So I'll spend quite a bit of time going through the GBA, and we'll use this as almost like a recap of what we have done for the last 5 weeks. And of course, this will also help you for your finals in terms of tackling this kind of case study question, what to look out for, and what we need to write in your answers, right? So I think overall, all the groups did pretty well. There are some groups that did exceptionally. So later I'll just highlight, and then if you know a group member or if you'd like to share with your classmates, feel free to do that because they'll definitely benefit from the sharing for their finals. Sorry, I'm coughing a bit. All right, so let's kickstart today's lecture. So today we are just talking a bit on ESG investing. So after all, the course is called Impact Investing, right? And you've noticed that we haven't really talked much about it. Of course, the GBA cover or require you to cover a bit on ESG. And so I saw some groups also actually read the study guide or even the notes, which is adapted from the study guide. All right, so that's a good thing. But I guess at the end of the day, the idea of ESG is not new to most people, and you have probably heard about it one form or the other from various sources, news articles in the news, it's everywhere, right? But let's just understand it in a more formal process and what it means. All right, so let's look at this. Let me just my pen. All right, so ESG basically stands for three things: environment, social, and governance. Right. So we have three components. So in the environment component, I guess this is what most people are very familiar with. So we talk about environmental sustainability. We think about pollution, water issues. Of course, mining is one of them, or even oil and gas, which you have already probably read through the GBA and understand the case. So those are all environmental issues that could arise from various activities performed by a firm. In terms of the social activities, these are slightly less obvious, and they largely relate to, like in the case the indigenous community, maybe in terms of the employees' benefits, the welfare, what they need. But they also actually cover things like corruption, labor, relationships, health and safety, especially those working in, let's say, if you are engineer, right, in the oil and gas industry. So health and safety becomes very important. But of course, those of us who are like, more blue collar kind of so most of us who are more like white collar workers, I guess health and safety would not be something of an issue. But if you are more blue collar in the sense that you do like that real engineering work, you go to the site and all, then health and safety is one of the issues that arise from the social aspect. But the issue with social is that most of the time social change takes quite a long time for the impact to be felt. And this is quite so when you think about it in terms of, let's say, poverty. If you think about things like food scarcity, trying to alleviate hunger. So these kind of things are a bit more, I would say, wide, or they might not be really the core values of a firm. So it can be a bit tricky. For example, a firm might say, yes, we follow the ESG kind of criteria, maybe even they might be ESG rated, but are their goals really like trying to battle, let's say, world hunger or to alleviate poverty throughout the world, right? Perhaps not. So the thing is, in terms of the social aspect, it can be a bit gray. It might be a bit tough to actually understand, like how does the firm's activities really tackle the social aspect of this ESG. Maybe environmental, we can still see, right? So for example, maybe it can be very direct. So they're changing their utensils to more away from plastic to more like paper, cardboard kind of utensils. So those are very direct. But in the social aspect, it can be a bit gray. And of course, last but not least, governance, which is one of the easiest way that companies implement ESG, simply because governance is something within their control. So when we think about governance, it can be things like, number of board members who are independent, right? Or like maybe number of committees, or audit committees, or remuneration committees, or risk committees. So number of committees in the firm. So these are like basic governance to protect the various stakeholders for the firm. So I believe most of you all know this thing of stakeholders and shareholders, right? So shareholders are the ones that basically owns the business. They own part of business. For example, if you just buy a share of Google, you are basically a shareholder. But stakeholders are wider, right? So we think of stakeholders as if, like what we mentioned here, it could be the employees, it could be the suppliers, the customers, community. So these are all stakeholders, and the governance mechanism of the firm tries to protect the stakeholders as well as the shareholders. And so there are various methods. If we just pull back to the GBA, we talk about having on the board one indigenous person on the board, right? So he can champion the interests of the indigenous group. So that's one way governance is being implemented in the firm. All right. Any comments on this ESG? This is just a broad introduction, and I say hopefully this is not new to everybody, and you have seen it in one way or another. Good. So actually ESG is something that I'm quite interested in, and some of you might know, or I've introduced in the past, that I do research in ESG. So in terms of the details, right, like how deep you can go in each component, it can actually go very deep. For example, governance is one of the most researched area in ESG, simply because, like say, it's in the control of the firm, and there are a lot of things that have been implemented. But actually, the social aspect here is one of the least researched, simply because most firms do not have a very strategic kind of like social goal. Some might, but not many. So that's the issue. And things like governance, you'll be surprised that there are a lot of things that can relate to governance. I think one of the group mentioned in their group project that you know what, voting can be a governance mechanism. So we call it voting with your feet. So this is an interesting term. So voting with your feet means that you threaten to short sell the shares if the company do not follow certain policies or certain demands that you want, right? So this is called voting with your feet. Feet meaning that you are using actions. And this is very common. We call it shareholder activism. So all these are just basically knowledge that I hope you all can understand, and then because you never know when a case might actually require you to pull out all this knowledge, just say a couple of lines, right? So basically there's this voting with your feet, where I think one group mentioned in their GBA where the shareholders might actually vote out let's say the management, right? Simply because the management do not meet their demands. So this is an example of governance mechanism as well. On the flip side, not really on the flip side, but alternative way is called voting with your voice. So feed is about short selling of the shares, short selling, and as we talked about it previously already, and I hope you know, basically you're threatening to sell the shares in the market to actually impact the stock price, right? So that's short selling. And then there's voting for voice. Voice meaning that you group together and try to make a real change in the company. For example, if you're a minority shareholder, maybe you group with other minority shareholder so that you can become, let's say, if you are 10%, 10%, 10%, you group together, become 30%, right? So you have more voice. So that's voting for voice. So these two are the one of the key mechanisms that shareholders can actually use for governance of the firm. All right. So all these are just a bit extra. They're not in your study guide, but it's good to know as well. All right. So there's this thing called the Principle for Responsible Investment. I believe this is from the UN as well. If you just Google and check UN Principle of Responsible Investment, you will see this whole list of principles. Again, I'll not be going through every single one. You can just have a look. And of course, you know, in the exam, they'll never ask you list down the principles, right? Because first of all, it's open book. It's more about application of these principles. So what I guess is important is to understand how does these principles actually is implemented in the company, and to identify where these principles are found in their, let's say, in the case, right? So generally they revolve around, of course, ESG, and let's say to incorporate versus ESG, various ESG issues in the decision-making process, and so various disclosures that has to be in place, of course, promote and accept certain principles for investment, let's see, and of course, for to report activities and progress of implementation of these principles. So basically they relate to, first of all, investments and how company supposed to act as good, I guess, stewards to the market. So not only focusing on the shareholders, to actually focus on stakeholders, to bring in various issues, ESG discussions, or in their decision making, or even in the investment process. So that's the main thing about this UN Principle for Responsible Investment. Any questions so far? Everyone's good? All right. All right. Okay. So demand for ESG investment. So increasingly, there has been, of course, more demand. If you notice in the news, there's a lot more news about this whole issue of ESG. So we think about it as the growing awareness. All right. So people are more and more invested in the idea of ESG, and they believe that it's true, right? So with more awareness of the public, of course, companies are being also pressured to follow suit, to incorporate various policies in their business plan. So as I mentioned, there is a shift away from the shareholder to stakeholder. So how you can think of this is, previously there's this thing called shareholder theory, which basically means that you just focus on value maximization. So if you recall back in your year one, where you studied financial management, we talk about the goal of the firm, and we say that is to maximize share value, right? And then we had, if you do remember, there was a discussion about whether maximizing share value is the same as maximizing market share. So anyone still remember what's the difference between market share and share value? You can just type in the group chat. What's the difference between market share and share value? So share value is quite intuitive, right? So basically the value of the share that is traded on the market. Now, the thing about market share, it seems very similar, but we will have to differentiate it. So sometimes when you read the question, just be a bit careful when they say market share or share value. So market share is how much of the market you own or your products penetrate. So for example, the best example would be let's think about fair price, right? So fair price have quite a large market share of the supermarket business in Singapore. I would think it's probably more than 50%. Then you have your cold storage, which is a bit lesser. Maybe you have more like Sheng Siong, which is a bit so lesser, and previously you have Giant, which is very small and only in a few places. So that is market share, but share value, that's different, right? That is the shareholders theory where we want to maximize the share price. So that's share value. So there is a slight move away from shareholder to stakeholder, where we want to look at more of all various parties involved. And the issue with stakeholder sometimes is that it can be so wide. It can include almost everything. So you can talk about it as like a customer, suppliers. These are very direct, right? But your stakeholder could even include, let's say, if you are a business in Singapore, but it could include someone, let's say, in China, if you do manufacturing there, and the impact you have, maybe your manufacturing processes, or even the factory sanitation and things in China, right? So your stakeholders is so wide. It can include, of course, cross-border kind of stakeholders, or it could even include maybe NGOs, activist groups. So there are a lot of stakeholders, and the list is almost infinite. So this something that usually an organization as a whole would have to define who are the key stakeholders they want to target their policies. And because they can't target all stakeholders. So, of course, at the end of the day, people always think that, oh, you know what, ESG would provide some long-term financial benefits at the end, because firm, of course, they do want profit, right? It's profit maximization. They are not a non-profit organization, or they are not a government, right? But there are a lot of issues with this. So at the moment, right, there might be some research saying, yes, if you invest in ESG, your long-term financial performance will improve. But there are a lot of also contradicting kind of research or results that show that actually ESG does not improve your financial performance. So in that sense, is actually very contradictory. So there is actually no black and white whether ESG will improve financial performance, even though we think it might. Case in point is that a lot of research found that ESG, so this is an interesting concept, is almost like an insurance. So basically ESG insures the company from black swan events, almost like an insurance, right? When you have accident, something happen, ESG kind of insures company. So yes, similar to insurance, you still have to pay some premium, you still have to, incur some costs. For example, if you buy insurance, if you have an accident, you go to hospital, it does not mean you don't pay anything, right? You still have to pay something, but maybe the insurance cover 90%. So similarly, in ESG, what they found is that ESG could be like an insurance. So it insures the company for a black swan event, but it doesn't remove the impact of, let's say, an incident, an oil spill. It doesn't remove the impact. So people found that it could be thought of like an insurance. Nowadays, people use ESG as a product differentiation. So I'm just going to write if here, where if you have ESG in your product, you have a green product, you have something that's sustainable, it becomes like a product differentiation. So you differentiate from your other suppliers, your competitors, right? And last but not least, so this is the 1, 2, and there's a third one known as agency. So agency, anyone knows what's agency theory? Anyone have heard of agency theory? I believe actually in year one, probably we in the course we also talk about agency theory. So basically, agency theory, right? Just quickly go through is that the shareholders and the managers are different, right? And so the managers are agents to the company, and because of agency, what happens is that there might be a differentiation in terms of their interest, right? The shareholders want to increase their share price. Maybe the agents don't want. Maybe they're just looking for a short profit. So the thing about agency is that sometimes ESG becomes an agency issue. Why? Imagine you are a manager. You are given let's say 5 million, right, to invest in some ESG initiative, right? And ESG initiative can be super wide, right, as you know. So the issue with agents, why agency comes in, is that you, as a manager, because you are given this sum and you can make a decision on how the sum is being used, you make the decision to invest this sum into something you are interested in as an agent. For example, you are very passionate, let's say, about the marine life, and so you want to invest in or contribute to the improvement of some aspect of the marine, maybe pollution, to clean up pollution, to support biodiversity in, let's say, the Great Barrier Reef. So it becomes a very personal endeavor, right? It becomes a very personal kind of initiative, and because of that, there is this issue of agency in ESG as well. As much as we talk about insurance and product differentiation, sometimes a lot of the ESG initiative is driven simply by personal interest of the managers. And so that is an issue in ESG investing. Which is why when we think about long-term performance, it might not be actually very beneficial. So there is no clear cut saying that ESG is good for long-term performance, even though overall people say that it should be, right? But there is no evidence that black and white it is actually improving long-term performance. Anyone like to make some comments? Yeah. Because I think this topic of ESG is best thought of in terms of maybe even like a discussion, if you have some comments. If not, it will just be on just a theory kind of thing. Of course, you know, the baseline for ESG investing is that ethics and profit need not be mutually exclusive, meaning that companies can do good and be profitable as well. And like I mentioned, this need not be the case, right? So ESG funds outperform non-ESG funds. So this is something that is very archaic. So archaic meaning that is very backwards. Like people say like, oh, you know, you should invest ESG because it should improve your portfolio performance, right? Because at the end of the day, we're doing portfolio. But the problem with this is that by implementing some unique circumstances, remember we talked about IPS, but so let's say if we have a unique circumstance that you do not want to invest in any SEEN stocks. So what are SEEN stocks? SEEN stocks, so this is SEEN stocks. So SEEN stocks are things like, for example, you do not want to invest in alcohol. You do not invest in, let's say, cigarette companies, right? So these are like, I guess, SEEN companies. But then again, if you do not invest in SEEN stocks, basically what happens is that your diversification drops by substantial component, right? So let's say if you do, later we'll talk a little bit about this, but thematic kind of investment. So thematic means you follow certain themes. So for example, you only invest in, let's say, technology team, you want to invest in agriculture team. So yes, very good, you invest in this team, but what you're trading off is diversification. So if you trade off diversification, let's say a market goes down, right? Let's say we have a recession. Usually, the SEEN stocks are the one that perhaps could weather actually no, they might actually not weather the recession too well, right? But let's say if market is going up, the scene stocks are perhaps the one that will improve faster because people have more discretionary income. They purchase more, I don't know, alcohol, tobacco, cigarettes, and these are the stocks that could go up faster and provide you with more returns. Of course, at the same time, if the market go down, these stocks might not reduce in value too quickly because people naturally, if you are a smoker, you continue to be a smoker, right? It doesn't mean that when the recession comes, you stop smoking altogether. Yes, maybe you kick off or you reduce by 1 pack a day, but you still smoke. So in that sense, there is a bit of stickiness to scene stocks. So remember, we talk about sticky pricing, we talk about how inflation can be sticky and all. In the same sense, scene stocks can be a bit sticky, right? People who enjoy having, let's say, a gin and tonic or wine, would still continue enjoying those scenes, I guess, if you want to call it, regardless of how the economy is doing. Yes, you might reduce, but it doesn't mean you cut it up altogether. So there's a bit of stickiness to this scene stocks, which gives you a bit more diversification in terms of your portfolio. So if you implement a restriction, you naturally lose your diversification. All right. Okay. So let's just look at some ESG investing styles. On the upfront, I would like to just highlight that the ESG integration and this thing called negative screening are the most important. And I actually wrote it here already. But there are many ways we can invest in ESG. So ESG integration is perhaps the most obvious, where you just add certain ESG or green stocks or even ETF into your portfolio, right? Because remember, at the end of the day, we are thinking the ESG from a portfolio management perspective. So we just add certain ESG stock inside, right? So that's just integrating ESG into your portfolio. Then we have various other derivative of how ESG styles can change. For example, we know about the idea of rebalancing and tilting. So we can actually have some tilt of our ESG products, our ESG, let's say, assets in the portfolio to a certain tilt, right? So we give it, for example, you want more of a technology tilt, so we slowly rebalance our portfolio towards more technology. So we touched a little about this active ownership earlier, and I mentioned the voting with your feet, voting with your voice. So all these are ways where the portfolio manager can actually influence the corporate behavior. So why is this important? If you do recall the case, there is this there are two examples cited in the case. One is the New York, something about New York Stock Exchange, and then the other one, which is more pertinent, is the Norges Investment Bank. So the Norges Investment Bank basically is the largest sovereign wealth fund in Norway. And the thing about this Norges Investment Bank is that they, being the largest in the entire world, right, they invest a lot in many companies. And their stake in the companies usually is less than 5%. But as you know, having even 1% stake is a lot, in the sense that a lot of investment is required just for 1% stake in certain companies. And because they're the largest, they own a portfolio of a lot of stocks. And let's say if you are portfolio manager for one segment of their investment, basically you get to make decisions on voting simply because you are still a 1% shareholder. And like I say, you can actually team up with other minority shareholders to make a change. And why I bring up Norges Investment Bank is because they are very active in their ESG drive, and they will actually divest companies that they feel are not aligned with their ESG goals. So just last year, they announced the requirement to meet, or for all companies in their portfolio to follow the Paris Agreement. So maybe some of you all know the Paris Agreement, where they companies are going towards zero carbon by 2030 or 2050. I think it's 2030 or 2050. I can't remember which date. But basically, what the Norges investment fund announced is that they would divest companies that do not meet this requirement or are not aligned to the reduction of carbon. So because of that, they can actually force the companies in their portfolio to pursue this goal of reducing carbon, right? So this is how active or engaging share ownership, engagement of ownership works, where the shareholders, or not the shareholders, but the asset managers can influence the firm. And yeah, in terms of this thing called impact investing, so impact investing is basically you are trying to measure what kind of, so you measure it from an impact perspective, meaning the effect of the investment. So yes, you might invest in certain things, but you don't really bother too much of, oh, I'm investing in this and that, but you want to measure the impact of your investment. And so the impact of your investment is the metrics that you use to tilt your investment style. So for example, if you are investing in, let's say, a solar company, right? And you notice that, oh, because you're investing in a solar company, maybe you are saving or you are reducing the use of, let's say, fossil fuels or even natural gas by X amount. So the X amount of reduction in fossil fuels is the impact of your investment, and use that as an investment style. All right, so positive screening, best in class. Basically, we use certain companies or maybe certain strategies or even other asset management firm, and we use their so-called the best in class strategy and implement it in our investment portfolio as well. So going back to the idea of Norges Bank, they are one of the top proponents for ESG investment. And so perhaps if you are a small asset management firm, you can actually use the ideas of Norges Bank to support your, I don't know, your screening process or maybe even your portfolio creation, right? So you use their ideas, their knowledge, and you create your own portfolio, which mimics their so-called best-in-class ESG portfolio. All right. I did mention this thematic meaning that you only invest in certain themes. So in your IPS, you could say like, oh, I only want investment in, let's say, in this example, clean energy, green technology, and sustainable, let's say, agriculture. So these are the themes that you want your portfolio manager to invest in, all right? And then you only can invest in these various themes. Now, the issue with thematic is that, again, the idea of diversification is an issue. But not only that, a lot of these big themes, right? For example, clean energy can be very, let's say, not very clean. So if those of you who are really have been keeping up with the news of things like the electric car, you might know that there are a lot of news nowadays that says that, you know, actually electric car, yes, it might save the amount of petrol that is being used in the long term, but the manufacturing of electric cars by itself is actually very dirty, right? It is not a clean process. And the reason being is that if you read news, they say that the battery in the electric car requires a lot of heavy metal that can only be mined in certain countries, and those countries are in the African region, and most of the miners could be, child labor. It could be in very poor working conditions, and being paid very little, right? And so yes, you might say, oh, I'm buying electric car, it's clean, it's like a new Tesla. Yeah, very good, right? And yes, it might benefit the environment in 5 or 10 years if you use the car for that long. But the process of even manufacturing it might not be very green. So the idea of thematic is, yes, it's good. You want to have certain themes, but we need to be very careful, right? Let's say if we are supporting the idea of electric car, we need to be very clear that yes, it is green if you look at it from a product life cycle of, let's say, 10 years, because you save X amount of petrol, but it is not clean at the get-go of its life cycle. The get-go meaning when it's being manufactured, it could be actually even dirtier than traditional car. So having this idea or knowledge in mind will allow you to make better decisions, right? So you don't only look at the outcome, you look at the full spectrum of the whole value chain before deciding that something is green, right? So feel free to share if you have some other knowledge about things that might seem green but actually are not green. The electric car is one very good example, and I guess there are a lot of other examples. Anyone know about this hydrogen energy? Now this is very, very popular, hydrogen. Anyone heard of it, or have certain knowledge on whether hydrogen is good or bad? No? Okay. Okay, so maybe I'll just share a bit. Like I mentioned, because this lecture is a lot on, first of all, general knowledge, and you should have you need to read up and like to have all this knowledge so that you can maybe answer some ESG questions, right? Because ESG is so wide, there's so many things nowadays. Okay, so let's talk a little about hydrogen, and why is it important? Is because if any one of you are following the hydrogen market, especially in Singapore, Singapore is trying to go towards hydrogen. And in fact, if you look at some news, Keppel, or even Sembcorp, they're trying to build this thing called an floating hydrogen platform. Floating meaning that it will be this platform that will house hydrogen to produce energy. So so going back to a bit of chemistry, right? The good thing about hydrogen is H2, right? The molecule H2. And when you combust H2, the outcome of the combustion of H2 only produces water. So this is super clean, right? Everyone's like, wow, it was, I mean, it's not a breakthrough now. It's like everyone knows about this. But the cleanness of this energy is outrageous, right? There is no carbon involved, right? It's so perfect. And Singapore being Singapore, we kind of want to jump on the bandwagon. Our big corporations, Keppel, Sembcorp, are trying to build this hydrogen terminal, right, to store hydrogen. But intrinsically, if you think about it, hydrogen is a gas, right? And it's if you do remember about chemistry, its latent heat of vaporization is very low. Okay, so latent heat of vaporization meaning that it will vaporize very easily, right? It's very hard for it to become a liquid. What does that mean? Is that your hydrogen will require a very cold temperature to become a liquid and to stay a liquid. And the easiest way to transport any kind of fuel is in a liquid form. So solid, obviously, so heavy, whatever, right? Gas is like you need a very big tank to transport, let's say, a small amount of gas, right? But liquid is one of the best state to transport. But because its latent heat of vaporization is so low, it vaporizes so easily, we need a very cold tank. And first of all, to maintain the temperature to transport hydrogen. And okay, so to maintain this temperature to transport hydrogen is very costly and requires a lot of energy. First of all, for the vaporizing, for the liquefy liquefaction process. I don't think that's the word, but anyway, to liquefy the hydrogen. And not only that, after liquefying the hydrogen to transport it, we need to vaporize the hydrogen. So it's a two-step process, right? So because of that, it requires a lot of cost, a lot of energy to do it. First of all, to liquefy, and then liquefy meaning you need to remove the heat, and then later to heat up again. So both the removing of heat and heating up the hydrogen is actually a very dirty process. And so the question is whether hydrogen is a clean energy is now in a big discussion, right? We do not know whether hydrogen is clean or not. And one more thing about hydrogen is that one of the biggest exporter of hydrogen within the Southeast Asian region is actually either Indonesia, if I'm not wrong, or Australia. And to transport hydrogen across the sea is very, very difficult. So there could be aspirations for cleaner energy in Singapore, but at the end of the day, it can be a very dirty process, right? So at the end of the day, what I'm trying to say is that think of it as a value chain. So when we think about ESG, always think about this idea of value chain. Yes, you might be clean at the end of your value chain. Remember, value chain is a chain, right? Like you might be clean here, but you might be very dirty at this part, right? The whole process is very dirty. So think of ESG investment style as a value chain. Don't try not to just focus on the end component. Think about it as the whole value chain, whether your investment is green, right? And it's, I guess at the end of the day, anything for any big green hype, think of it as a value chain. Yeah, does the end justify the means? And remember when we talk about the thing about the electric car, I think there was a research paper that says that the end only justify the means, meaning that the savings of the petrol of the electric car only justifies how dirty the process was if you use the electric car for, I think, 7 or 8 years, right? If you use the electric car for anything less than that, basically it's not so environmentally friendly to even buy the electric car in the first place. So yeah, we need to think about it as a whole ecosystem, as a complete kind of investment strategy. All right, so much about value chain. Let's just think a little more on this thing called negative screening, which is I guess the second most used kind of investment style. And it's quite easy. You just basically just exclude any non-ESG friendly sectors from your portfolio. For example, oil and gas, you just remove it. All right. Okay, so ESG information, there are various information now out there. I think the SGX requires listed firms to provide a sustainability report nowadays, and this was quite recent, I think in the last 5 years that was being introduced, but of course not all countries provide this. And the thing about ESG report, okay, so I guess the whole issue of ESG is everyone knows ESG is good and everything. We see all the good things of ESG, but what I'd like to bring to this discussion here is to make you think about how ESG is actually could be not so good or is very gray. Okay, one example is ESG report, right? We talk about ESG report being, oh, it's so good, we have more information about the company, we know what they do. But the question is this actually marketing? Why I say is it marketing? It's because a company would never say that, oh, we pollute the environment, we have an oil spill, and how much biodiversity was killed or died, right? No ESG report or sustainability report will mention such a thing, or they will not say that, oh, we did not contribute to X charity to reduce hunger. They will not say that, right? All ESG report, if you go look at, if you go just dig out from SGX, we always say, oh, we did this and this and this, which improve, let's say, reduce the carbon emissions, or we grew I don't know how many acres of forest within the last 1 year, or we supported the indigenous community in let's say water scarcity, right? So basically everything is 90% or 98% is all positive. And the question is this report more marketing, right? Similar to marketing, you never market a company as bad, right? Marketing is always to show the best side, the unique, the value proposition of the company, right? So ESG report almost seems like a marketing tool, right? A company will never disclose in an ESG report that they did all the bad things. They always talk about all the good things they do. So this has been a big question, right? So yeah, so what you require ESG reporting, but at the end of the day, you just report all the good stuff. Because it's unlike financial reports. Financial reports have numerical value. They have you can't fake the numbers, right? Okay, if you fake that, that's a different story. That will be more like a fraud and everything, right? But if your company is doing bad, it's doing bad. There's nothing you can fake. But ESG report is so vague, right? There's so many things that you can just gloss over. You just don't even say it, even though you might be doing certain negative stuff, right? So that's the issue with ESG report. Now, we have this thing called ESG rating. I think not most of you all probably have heard of it. So if you are working, if you have access to Bloomberg, you'll know that Bloomberg has their own rating. You know, we have this thing called MSCI or Sustainalytics. They also have their own rating kind of system. And of course, in most issue with rating is that there is no best in class. What do you mean by best in class? There is no let's say generic or consensus that this rating company does the best rating. There's no such consensus. It is still very divergence in terms of which rating company gives the most accurate, the best rating. And of course, at the end of the day, ratings are these ESG ratings, them being independent company, and the rating agencies not being like governments, right? They are not enforcing certain requirement of the company. The how they get the rating is actually through various public sources, things that surface to the market, right? And all these sources usually are more indirect source of information. So what do I mean by indirect? Indirect meaning, right? They might not directly say that the company, for example, pollute the rivers, but we might have certain sources that, or certain research or studies that say, oh, the river near XXX factory seems to have a high level of mercury, right? So yes, we can relate that the mercury should come from the factory, but this is a very big underlying assumption. Yes, it could come from the factory, or it could come from further or other factories upstream, right? Upstream of the river, right? So it can be other things. And because of that, it is very difficult to measure the direct impact of what we observe or what the rating agency observe to the impact of sustainability or how the company perform its sustainable practices or initiative. And so because of this indirect process, there's a lot of discussion whether the rating really reflects the ESG initiative of the firm. So remember, so that's a very interesting question, right? But are our rating agencies trustable? Yes, because if those of you all know that 2008 financial crisis was partly fueled by very optimistic, okay, so if you want to put it nicely, very optimistic ratings of securities. In particular, they are your asset-backed securities, right? They are being treated as a AAA security, where in fact they are including very junk mortgages. And yeah, so are rating agencies trustable? So the very same rating agencies that probably fueled the '08 financial crisis are actually the one providing ESG rating. The exact same company. So for example, S&P 500 or S&P Global, they call it S&P Global Ratings. They provide the credit ratings for the company, and they are one of the major players in the '08 financial crisis, right? And they actually provide ESG rating as well nowadays. And the Department of ESG rating is growing very big. And so, yeah, are they trustable? The question is, we do not know. But we need to know that at the end of the day, they are driven also by profit, right? So, like I mentioned earlier, ESG companies are not government, right? So a government intuitively would think that government would serve the good of the public, right? They are supposed to treat or to actually almost redistribute wealth, right? In the segment of society. Redistribute wealth can be a form of like GST packages and things, right? So so government is supposed to redistribute wealth, supposed to support various public goods like healthcare and all those, right? But if you ask yourself, is a company supposed to do that? Yes, they might be invested in ESG, but their purpose is not supposed to, let's say, provide public health care for you and I, right? If their purpose is supposed to do that, then they become the government, right? So it's almost as if, like, yes, a company might be investing a lot in ESG, but the bottom line for a company or even a rating agency is not so much about providing societal kind of benefits for the community and all. At the end of the day, their responsibility is tied to the contract they have with their shareholders. So we should be very careful when we say that, oh, companies should invest more in ESG because it's good for their long-term financial performance. First of all, we know that it's not. We have a long discussion, but at the end of the day, the responsibility of providing societal benefits or societal kind of to equalize the society is not the responsibility of companies. They are actually the responsibility of the government, right? So is it right to place so much responsibility on a private firm to do the actions that a government is supposed to provide? So this is a question, or these are things that hopefully you can think about when you think about ESG. So some of you are already working. Maybe you have like a discussion in the pantry with your colleagues, your boss, and all, right? So rather than just saying, oh yeah, ESG is good, it's good for long-term performance, maybe you can just throw in some kind of like, be like a bit of a devil's advocate, throw in a spanner into the argument, right? To say, actually, does it really make sense? Like, a company is not supposed to replace the government, right? And provide societal benefit for everybody. That's the job of the government. So if we are going to enforce the responsibility of a government to the company, then what's the difference between a company and a government? And do we even need a government in the first place? Maybe not, right? So hopefully you can have such discussions and to bring up such information in your discussion, rather than just saying, oh, ESG is good, it's all the positive, right? Try to think a bit of the negative as well. Yeah, all right. So of course, feel free to make any comments if you have contribute to this discussion. All right, so let's just look a little on this thing called, more on this ESG data and price relevant information. So what's all this whole chunk of data is saying, right, is that there must be two schools of thought in ESG. So there's two schools of thought, meaning one that advocates ESG and wants ESG to be in place, and one that doesn't want ESG to be in place. The reason being is that if everyone wants ESG, then there is no benefits or or costs involved in not investing in ESG, or maybe put it a better way, there's no benefits of investing in ESG if everyone wants ESG. It's almost as if there's a very good example. So if you say that you are happy okay, so this is just, it's not really ESG, but it's a very good example to explain. If you say if you're happy every single day, right, you're never unhappy, then the question is, are you even happy, right? Because if you are happy every day, then how do you know that you're even happy, and are you even happy, right? So in the same sense, right, if everyone invests in ESG and everyone is a strong advocate of ESG, then is there any benefit in investing in ESG in the first place if everyone is the same? There's no differentiation factor. There is no, remember just now we talked about differentiation, how ESG helps differentiate, and remember we talked about how ESG is a provides an insurance kind of benefits. There might not be any insurance or differentiating factor after all. And because of that, that might reduce the demand for ESG, right? So this is what this whole chunk of text is trying to say. So we need to think about how market inefficiency actually drives the demand for ESG. All right. Okay. So let's just touch a little more on this, the various products. There are a lot of products, but these are more loan type products. So we have a green bond. So I hope you know what's a green bond. We know what's a bond, right? Now, a green bond basically is a bond that is tagged to a green project. That's how we see it. And usually why people want to issue green bond tagged to a green project is that they usually have certain, first of all, interest. There's usually lower interest. Lower interest for the bank, but like higher interest for the bond holders. Okay, and then maybe there's a bit of tax incentive as well for green bonds. Green loans. So what's interesting in green loans is also very similar and usually is tagged to a project. So bonds and loans, these green loans and green bonds are tagged to a project. So for example, a green loan will have certain restrictions in terms of proceeds of funds. So proceeds of funds meaning what the loan money can be used for. All right. So the loan money can, let's say, only be used for building solar panels, let's say, and cannot be used for building oil terminals or oil and gas terminals. That's the same. And usually there is a kind of reporting process. Reporting meaning that they have to report their progress on the projects, and then usually there will be an external kind of evaluator that will evaluate the project and say that, oh, okay, the project is going according to certain green standards and label, let's say, safety requirements. So all these are requirements for green loan. Now, this green loan is very different from a sustainability linked loan. So I think it's important to differentiate and not confuse both of it. So remember, green loans are linked to a project and a green project before the loan is being even dispersed, right? But a sustainability linked loan simply means that this loan is linked to some sustainability related metrics. Okay, so what a sustainability related metrics could be? For example, the reduction of carbon in the supply chain. So you know your whole supply chain, you can track the carbon emission, right, from the start to the end. For example, from if you are like a grain company, you are growing rice, you can track the carbon from the start of growing of the rice all the way to the transportation of the final rice to your final consumer. So let's say you want to do a sustainability linked loan, we can say that, oh, if the company reduces the carbon emission by 30%, they will get some benefits in terms of interest. So for example, when a bank disperses a loan, this sustainability green loan disbursed by the bank could be linked to the reduction in carbon. And if the company reduce the carbon by 30%, the interest on the loan will be reduced by, let's say, 1% reduction or 0.5% reduction in the interest that the bank will charge the company. And so, because of that, it encourages the company to reduce their carbon, right? So it's linked to a sustainability-related metrics. But what's important is that the proceeds of this sustainability-linked loan need not be linked to a project that is green. So this sustainability-linked loan can be just used for any other thing. So the proceeds can be used for, let's say, I want to build a factory, right? So you can use the thing to build a factory, just that you link this loan to a sustainability-related metrics. So again, to bring up some kind of a bit of a discussion in terms of whether this sustainability-linked loan is a good thing, I'd like to provide you with some alternative views. So the issue with sustainability-linked loan is that because the proceeds need not be used to fund green projects, it could be, but it need not be. It can very well be used to, let's say, fund oil exploration, meaning they go to the sea and try to find areas that there's a lot of oil, right? And these are very dirty kind of projects. But then they could balance this with, let's say, reforestation, right? So if a company reforests, I don't know how many acres of forest in Indonesia, they can create this sustainability-linked loan. And the problem is that from an outsider, maybe from an investor point of view, who did not, let's say, study this module or do not know the difference between a green loan and a sustainability-linked loan, you think it's the same thing, right? Oh, sustainability-linked, so meaning that the loan is green, is doing green projects and all, but actually in actual fact is actually no. The sustainability loan can be used to do dirty projects, just that it's being linked to a ESG metrics, right? So that's something that we need to be very careful of when we look at investments. All right, so ESG or greenwashing, nowadays there is a lot of attention given to the idea of greenwashing. So generally, people think that higher ESG rating would reduce your cost of capital, reduce your financing costs. And yes, this might be true, but to quantify ESG in terms of numbers at the end of the day is also very tough. In fact, research shows that there is no direct link between ESG and cost of capital. As you know, cost of capital is WACC, right? I hope you remember your WACC. So there is actually no direct link. It's always very indirect between ESG and WACC. And because of that, there are so many other factors that could affect your cost of capital. And therefore, it is still very debatable. It's very gray, I would say. Of course, greenwashing is where a company tries to falsify its image of ESG. Maybe they are not very green after all, but they just pretend to be. This is very common. So anyone remember this crisis? They call it the pulp and paper crisis that happened in Singapore, actually. Anyone knows about this? Pulp and paper. Basically, there are companies that manufacture paper. Anyone heard of it? Pulp and paper? No? Okay, so this also happened in early 2000s. The pulp and paper scandal or crisis happened in a sense, it was Indonesian company, all right? So this is a real case, right? So it's an Indonesian company that is involved in producing paper, right? And we all use paper. or at least at that point in time. Now we use iPad and everything, which is better, I guess, for the environment. But we used to use a lot of paper, right? Everything is printed. Your exams, I guess, exams are also printed, right? So what happens is that this pulp and paper company in Indonesia, they had a lot of so-called green initiative in place. As you know, paper manufacturing is very dirty because, first of all, we're cutting down trees to produce paper. And in particular for Indonesia, they had to clear a lot of rainforests and chase or remove a lot of indigenous community from the various forested area to cut down the forest or to produce paper, right? So what happens is this, why it involves Singapore is that this company was listed on the SGX. And we know that SGX it prides itself being very highly regulated, very well managed. And yeah, so it is being listed on the SGX. But however, the company is Indonesian owned. So not to be stereotypical to say that in Indonesia there are a lot of undercurrents, right? You want to put it in a very bad way, a lot of corruption, but not necessarily corruption. It can be less than corruption, so it's not that bad, but then it is still like an underhand kind of like business that's going on. And what happens is that while they had a lot of green initiative, a lot of them were actually greenwashed. So meaning what? They actually chased out like indigenous communities. They actually cut down like rainforests in Indonesia. But then they greenwash it by saying, oh, you know what? We are reforesting how many acres of forest in this region, right? And then this whole scandal exploded because some green activist group found out that most of the initiative were greenwashed. But not least that, they were being listed on SGX. And so SGX was being attacked as well. It's like, Singapore being so well regulated, how can we allow such company to be listed on our exchange when they were quite obviously not following their so-called standards of sustainability standards that they have proclaimed that they were doing, right? So this is a very obvious case of greenwashing. Of course, not all cases of greenwashing kind of surface to the market, but this was one of the bigger cases that did. And so the issue of greenwashing is that nowadays there are a lot of activist groups that are almost like watchdogs. They will make sure that company do not step out of line in terms of like ESG, right? All right, so there are just a couple more points here. Maybe I think we'll try to finish a few more slides and the whole lecture before we just take a short break. So we might overrun a little, but let's try to do that. So yeah, there's no standardization of ESG reporting. I think I mentioned that. Rating is difficult to apply for decision making. So because different rating agencies have different methodologies of rating, it's very hard to implement, say, oh, you know, one agency say it's an A rated, the other says a B, so what? We take A plus B divided by 2, so what's that? It's very hard to quantify, right? Is there such an AB? I don't know. So it's difficult to do. Social factors, we mentioned it, that is very ill-defined. It's very hard to quantify social factors. And yeah, some green products are not green at all. Just now, remember we talked about the sustainability linked loan. So yeah, you might be saying it's sustainability linked loan, but actually you might be using the funds for the loan for non-sustainable products. So at the end of the day, remember, as portfolio managers, what we are trying to achieve is alpha, right? We are trying to achieve a return that is beyond our SML line or our capital market allocation, right? Remember your this graph here, your CML line. So basically you want to achieve something that's above to find what? To find alpha. So these two are the lines. And the question is, can we find alpha in ESG? Maybe not. So the short answer is maybe not. First of all, because the market is increasingly becoming very efficient. People are knowledgeable about ESG, and so to find alpha becomes increasingly very tough. In fact, actually, people that invest in like these scene stocks might yield higher return than if you limit the diversification of the portfolio away from scene stocks. Right? So we did mention about this already. Sustainability portfolio is less diversified. So if we also talk about this, if everyone has the same ESG preference, there'll be no ESG industry. Like I mentioned, if you're happy every single day, the question is, are you happy at all? Maybe not, right? So this is what we hope to achieve, right? ESG supposed to have positive impact on the environment, the society, and because of that, it discourages unsustainable behaviors, and it could impact the cost of capital, which is WACC. So WACC. But I want to just highlight that at the end of the day, this might not be the case for ESG. So just be very careful when you make like a broad-based statement that say that, investing in ESG should reduce cost of capital. They might not. Okay, I would like to just give you one more example here, just for your own knowledge and for interest, if you're interested in ESG, there's this very big debate going on about gender board diversity. Anyone heard of this term, gender board diversity? Or even just diversity by itself. I think nowadays diversity has been a very big discussion. All right. Yeah. Okay. So anyone knows why this is bad? Or have any kind of notion of or argument why is it bad? Why bad? Why is this bad? Oops, sorry. Why bad? So yeah, too many ideas. Okay, yeah. But having more people in a board can also have too many ideas, right? But why is this issue of gender such an issue? Why is it so bad to have more genders? Or not more genders, but more maybe equally rated genders, male and female, on the board. So yeah, okay, focus more on diversity, less on people. But remember, the board itself are not. Remember, board is supposed to be more like a regulatory kind of like governance for the firm, right? They are not like managers. Remember, boards are not managers. They are not implementing strategies. They are like recommending strategies. The implementation is done by a manager, right? So, okay, yeah, you can think about it. Yeah, maybe there is more ideas. Might focus more on diversity. Okay, so the issue is that we need to tackle this idea of gender. And the idea of gender, right, it becomes a very tricky issue. First of all, because we are talking about binary kind of categorization, binary meaning male or female, right? That what research has found is that having a more gender diverse board in a company does not improve the decision-making process and in turn the performance of the company. Okay, so the reason why is that if you require a company to have 50% female, 50% male, what happens is that, and this is a very unfortunate thing, is that the supply of females who can be directors on the board is much lesser than the supply of males who have the experience to be directors on the board. And this is based on statistics, right? They check the whole supply, or they did a survey of the whole market and realized that there's actually not enough female directors. And the issue being, right, if we require 50% male, 50% female, the less capable females are now being placed on the board and they make poorer decisions compared to if we place a capable male. So I mean, we are opening up a big can of worms here, right? We know that the issue of why there is not enough females who are capable dates back all the way to history, right? It dates back all the way to the issue of, the lack of education in the past. That was like maybe not even your parents' time, maybe your great-grandparents' time, right? There is not enough equality in terms of gender equality and all those things, right? And because of that, because of years of inequality, there hasn't been enough females who are as equipped to be part of the board. So what happens is that the research found that when companies mandate certain requirement for number of females on the board, the performance of the firm drops, and that's because of the lack of supply. Of course, this is a one-sided argument. The alternative side of the argument is that with more females on the board, we get a diverse view of certain initiative that should be implemented. And with a diverse view, we should have more or better decision-making process. So that is one side. So I guess most people would think about it as like, oh, gender board diversity is a good thing, right? Which is very common. More diversity in ideas, a better decision making. So that's a good thing. But what I would like you to bring back today is how we can think of it as a negative as well, and to think of it from a supply perspective. So a supply meaning there might not be enough supply. And actually, this would perhaps, if in your discussion, let's say with your colleagues at work, you'll bring up more stimulating ideas, right? That yes, we might think of it from a demand perspective. So I'd like to bring in the demand and supply. So demand meaning that yes, you demand more gender board diversity because of better, diverse decision making, but we need to think about the supply side, as all economic decision making is always demand and supply. So from a supply side, perhaps we might not have enough females with the knowledge to replace the males. And because of that, we are making poorer decisions as a whole for the company, right? So I hope this would provide you a bit of ideas to think on ESG, not simply it's good, everything is like brilliant, but no, there are a lot of issues with ESG. All right. Last but not least, so this brings the idea of trade-off, right? What are we trading off? So in that sense, remember just now we talked about the gender board diversity. We're actually trading off certain things, right? We are trading off better decisions. Yes, it might be better decisions, more diverse decisions, but we are trading off perhaps with the education level or the experience level of the board members. So there's always a trade-off. As of, all finance or economic theories, there's always a trade-off here. All right. So we there's various costs, implicit, explicit costs. So these are very obvious. So implicit meaning what are the returns, explicit, what is expenses. So these are very obvious kind of costs. Of course, we need to verify their product really truly reflects your motivation. So I want to just highlight the idea of value chain again. So make sure that what you say that is green is really green throughout the whole value chain, right? And if it's not, you should be aware that it's not. So you shouldn't be ignorant that it's not, so that you're making an informed decision. Also assess the accepted level of trade-off, right? So yes, you might invest in ESG, but what is the trade-off? And I'd like to bring the idea of the case study that we did in the GDA on the oil and gas, right? And we'll talk about this after the break. And this is a very important issue about whether divesting your oil company is a good thing. Okay, so let's take maybe a 10 minutes or 8 minutes break. Maybe we'll be back in 8 8:30, 8:35. Let's be back 8:35. We take a short break. So that's all for the lecture on ESG. We'll move on to the GBA after this. So we take a break and we'll come back 8:35. All right, welcome back. Hope you have a good break. Go to the toilet, have some drink, have coffee, have tea. All right, so let's discuss about the GBA. So for the benefit of those that came a little later, the results for the GBA has been released. TMA, I'm sure you have seen it. So the results for the GBA has been released. Overall, all groups did relatively well. So those that did not, I guess, score the 70 percentile, you'll notice that if you read through your answers, the thing that is mostly missing is the IPS. All right. So I'd like to use the GBA as almost like a recap of what we have done for the last 5 weeks or 6 weeks, including this week. And I mentioned, right, that we have completed the syllabus. So ESG, that was, I guess, a bit lighter, but we've covered all the required content. So the remaining time is more, first of all, to answer questions relating either to any concepts, as well as in the process go through a GBA. So feel free to ask any questions regarding the content we've covered so far. Either unmute yourself, you can chat, or just type in the group chat. And if not, I'll use the GBA just to run through the various concepts. All right. So again, feel free to type in the group chat if you have any questions. All right. So let me close this. Okay. So before we tackle the GBA case, and we discuss a bit of the concepts, I just want to highlight again the portfolio management process. Right? So groups that did well for the GBA went through the portfolio management process. And I guess even from the first lecture, I kind of emphasized a lot on the IPS, right? Let me just pull out my pen. Maybe this doesn't work. Let me save a copy. Doesn't work. Okay, maybe it's not working too well. Anyway, so I just want to highlight the portfolio management process that groups that did well go through the entire process of, first of all, planning. So the question simply just asked about asset management, asset allocation, right? How you allocate your assets. And this can be very similar to how maybe even a finals question might be crafted in that sense. Ask you, oh, how do you allocate assets? And we need to understand that in the portfolio management process, the asset allocation happens after you have done your IPS. All right. So the IPS is critical in your portfolio management process because remember, it directs all your investment strategy. So without the IPS, without analyzing all the components of the IPS, we would not be able to evaluate how do we manage your assets or strategically allocate assets. Why? Your IPS basically directs your risk and returns, right? We talk about the risk willingness and ability. It measures, what's your time horizon, what are your liquidity concerns, your legal constraints, your unique circumstances. So all these kind of summarize what your asset allocation should reflect. All right. So I want to highlight that in the exam, in case the question is very broad, like your GBA, it just tell you, oh, construct a portfolio or suggest an asset allocation. We always need to start off with the IPS right? Of course, in your GBA, the details will have to be more because it's a group project, but in an exam, I wouldn't think that you need to go to too much detail, but we should still analyze the various components of the IPS and not skip any component. And I guess the good thing is that given the GBA is our pension, we did cover the pension component of the IPS quite a bit. We talk about defined benefit plans and all those, right? What are the tax concerns, the ERISA, tax exemption and all those. So we did talk about quite a bit on the IPS for pensions. So unfortunately, I think only 50% of the group tackled the IPS component. And so basically, if you did tackle the IPS, you should score pretty well. And tackle it, of course, you tackle it very well, then you score pretty well. Okay, so I want to repeat that IPS is very important. Now, second of all, we need to analyze the market. So the market is very important. So groups that did well analyze the market, and reason being because the case gave you very detailed information about the market being cyclical, or there is a fall in oil prices, and so we need to analyze how do we tackle the falling oil prices due to the market, due to this market fluctuation, right? And when we talk about market, these are just a recap, right? When we talk about market, remember we need to think about risk management strategies. Recall various strategies that I mentioned about using derivative. Remember we went into quite detail on what kind of derivative we can use. We can use a swap, we can use an option, we can buy a put option, call option. Maybe we want to do I don't know, a combination strategy, right? We did talk a little like a protective put. If you recall, protective put, basically you buy a stock and you buy a short call position. So risk management is a critical aspect of managing the market, because you cannot control the market, but you can manage the risk involved in the market. Right? And a good answer will include also rebalancing. So we need to consider with a rebalancing strategy. Are you doing a constant mix strategy? What kind of rebalancing you should do? All right. And then finally construct the asset allocation. And the asset allocation, you have to bring in external data in terms of substantiating how the allocation would reflect the risk and return requirements. I'll pause here. Any questions so far? Let me just give me a moment. Let me just restart the program so I can
langsung dari phone.
Okay, so the rebalancing part is mentioned after you suggest your asset location. So how will you rebalance your portfolio? Let's say if the stock price decrease, sorry, the oil price decrease or increase. Okay, so rebalancing. Yeah. So basically what we can do is we follow this. Number one, IPS. Number two, assess the market, provide some risk management strategy. Then we can construct the portfolio, number three, and then we talk about some rebalancing, number four. Performance evaluation, we didn't have to consider in this GBA. You can mention a bit of stuff, but it's not really necessary. Performance evaluation. Remember, performance evaluation was our last lecture on attribution. So I want to highlight that this is very important for your finals by virtue of the fact that it has not been tested. So you should know that this is very important. Okay, performance attribution. Remember attribution and appraisal. How we do appraisal and attribution, micro and macro attribution. All right. So this is the summary. Any questions? Okay, one more thing I want to highlight again for risk, right? Remember, we need to always mention willingness and ability. So I think a lot of groups still forget about this willingness and ability component, this matrix, this square matrix, where you have this, willingness and ability. This is very important. We need to mention both components. So you cannot just say the risk tolerance is high because blah, 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 everything. You need to mention what is the risk ability, the risk willingness taken by the firm. Then you conclude what is the tolerance of the firm. Okay. So I want to highlight again, right, how we use. Okay, so how I'll use the information that we have learned from the last 6 weeks is that you should have almost like what I'll do is I'll do a checklist of things that I should talk about. All right. So you write, let's say in a Word document, like checklist in terms of single line. So like maybe there is a checklist of 30 items. So you want to go step by step of the 30 items so that when you have this checklist, whenever you do a question, remind yourself, okay, I need to follow checklist 1, 2, you need to follow step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then you go list by list, you go down, and then you analyze whether it relates to the case, relates to your question, etc. So you don't forget any components of this checklist. Because if you notice, the portfolio management process is quite standard. We follow a process, right? IPS, market, asset location, then balancing and performance evaluation. So for each component, it will be good to write a checklist of things that you need to consider. All right. Okay. So let's as usual, if you have any questions, so this is more like I try to use this GBA more like a recap of what we have done so far. So if you have any questions, just feel free to stop. The point being is not to go through a GBA because that has been done, but it's more for your finals and how you answer questions, right? So feel free to pause, ask any questions relating concepts that you think will be useful. So we have this a province in Canada, interestingly, since I'm in Canada as well. So we have this province here, which is very large. It has many different land mass and all. And then what's interesting is that the main kind of industry is this resource extraction. All right. Anyone have heard of this thing called Dutch disease? Anyone have heard this term? If you are in economics, you should have heard of this Dutch disease. DUTCH, Dutch and disease. Anyone heard of it? No? Okay. Okay, so before I go through what's Dutch disease, so this is out of your syllabus again, Dutch disease. But when I read this case, I immediately thought of Dutch disease. Okay, I'll explain why in a bit. But exam, the case, I don't think it will be this long. It will be shorter, but it will be a case as well, right? So like I mentioned, how usually these modules being tested is through cases. So it will not be that long. And this case, if you notice, require a lot of external information that you need to really like research because it's a good project, right? So you need research and stuff, but in the exam, it will be there, right? Information will be there so that you just need to implement and input your knowledge. All right, so before I go through Dutch disease, I just want to highlight, so if anyone wants to reference a very good project for this GBA that was done, I believe it was Group 5. So you can reach out to your Group 5 members if you want like a reference, right? Yeah. All right, okay, so okay, what's Dutch disease? Okay, so this might be a good knowledge to have. So what's Dutch disease? So Dutch basically is in the Netherlands, right? So we're talking about this country in the Netherlands. What happens is that in the past, the Netherlands used to extract a lot of resources, very similar to our case, where they rely on resource extraction to run their economy. So what happens when you do that? It's almost like a resource curse, which a lot of Middle Eastern countries face. But the Dutch disease is termed in this sense is because at that point of time in the Netherlands, they were extracting a lot of resources, right? And because they were extracting a lot of resources from the country, what happens is that a lot of the resources and infrastructure in the country was channeled towards resource extraction. And because of this, the other industries such as tourism, maybe even finance or IT were being neglected because everything was being channeled towards resource extraction, which in a sense, the human capital were all being channeled towards like engineering, resource extraction kind of activities. And it becomes so focused on resource extraction that the economy was driven by resource extraction and in particular oil extraction. And because of that, the country actually flourished, right? Because we extract a lot of raw material out, we sell it to the market. Naturally, the currency appreciated. And when the currency appreciated, exports become cheaper, right? Imports become cheaper for Netherlands, but the exports became so expensive for other countries to buy, right? And because of that, other countries simply just buy the oil if they need the oil, right? And not buy other products that's manufactured in the Netherlands. And this basically fueled a vicious cycle of dependency on resources. And this is termed as the Dutch disease because it's a disease that forces the economy of a country to continuously depend on resource extraction. And we all know resource extraction is limited. And so this case immediately, once you read this, right, that the case, the country simply depend on resource extraction, it should remind you of the idea of Dutch disease. And not only that, but some countries managed to escape this vicious cycle. And one of the best case in point was given in the question, in the case question, which is Norway. So Norway used to depend on resource extraction for 80% of its GDP. Now, the question is, how did Norway become as rich as it is now, right? You know that Norway is one of the very high quality of life country, Scandinavian country that has very high quality of life, good standard of living, and the people enjoys very high education, and very good infrastructure and all. But it used to be a country that depended on resource extraction. And when we compare this with other countries such as those in the Middle East now, or even African countries which depend on resource extraction, I guess the question you should think about is, how did Norway escape the curse of resources that so many other countries inevitably fail to escape? And when we think about other African countries, they kind of become stuck in this cycle, right? They depend on resources. The more they depend on it, they're being exploited. Their infrastructure of other sectors are being neglected. It's all focused on resource extraction, and we know that resources are always limited, and it's become a vicious cycle. So So yeah, anyone knows the story of Norway? How did Norway escape the curse of resources? By the way, the groupings are posted on the announcement page in the tutorial group, so you can see who are in group 5. So anyone knows what is the story behind Norway? How did Norway become such a rich, high standard of living country in the world? Oh, by the way, I think group 4 and group 5 also, both of them did very well. So you can approach both group 4 or group 5. Yeah. All right, so maybe you're not too sure about the story of Norway. Okay, so this is not rating a case, and of course not in your syllabus, but I think it's a good thing to know of the story of Norway. So the story of Norway comes about in the sense that in the past, Norway used to depend a very good, 80% of their resources on or they're not 80% of resources, but 80% of GDP on oil extraction. In fact, actually now it still really depend a lot of their now I think not so much, because now they depend a lot on shipping. So you know that Norway is one of the biggest, they have a lot of the biggest freight companies in the world. So like things like can't remember. There are a few big companies, but anyway, they are very big in shipping now. And the thing is, previously they used to do a lot of oil extraction. So how did they escape the resource curse? Is that what the government did was very smart. They used the investments or the money from selling their oil to subsidize other industries. All right, how they do it? So they subsidize other industries such as tourism, such as finance, so that it encourages these industries to grow. So very similar to what Dubai is actually doing, where they use a lot of the oil money to subsidize or pay for a lot of tourism infrastructure. So Norway did that. They did subsidize the other industries, but they did one more step more than a lot of Middle Eastern country. They invested the funds they got into the sovereign wealth fund. And to this point, it has been the largest sovereign wealth fund, that's now we mentioned, in the whole world. And because they have so much so-called sovereign wealth fund, and the purpose of a sovereign wealth fund is basically to maintain the quality of life of the citizens in the country, the returns on this sovereign wealth fund could help develop things like healthcare, education. So, I guess it's well known that in the Scandinavia countries, like education is free, healthcare is more or less free, and people don't pay like a crazy premium like in the US or even London, where in London the healthcare is free, but the waiting time is insane. But in like the Scandinavian countries, in Norway, like the quality of life is very high, very good healthcare, and people generally are very well educated. So what the government did is they took all the money from, not all, but a lot of the money from the oil wealth they had, invested in a sovereign wealth fund that will help to generate income when the resource runs out. And this kind of very smart investment by the company kind of avoided the resource curse. And in the process where they subsidize the other industries, they encourage their citizens to upskill or to reskill themselves as well to different sectors like IT or even finance, right? And so not all the human capital is focused simply on extracting oil. Right? So that's that. If you have this so-called idea in mind, when you read this case, you can actually immediately implement some strategies in the portfolio management of this company or even asset allocation of this company. Okay, all right. So now let's just as usual, stop me if there's any questions, comments, or things that you would like to chat about. Okay, so we know that now this province in Canada called OH, Old Lost Land, and Huskendor, we know that OH basically is a province that depend on resource extraction. So when we have this background of Norway, we have this background of Dutch disease, we know that it's not sustainable to always extract resources. We need a long-term investment plan for the country. Even though I know this is probably just more of like for the pension, but we need to have that in mind, right? So we see we are given some information about the fluctuation in oil prices. So we know that the economy is dependent on oil, dependent on oil royalties, and account for 25% of the government revenue, which is very high. And following the price decrease, there was unemployment. So we know that the market is fluctuating. So we need to think about some risk management strategies. In particular, if you know that the market is going down, maybe you should buy a short position, right? You should buy a short call position. So they did mention about the oil spill that happened. So I believe some groups tried to explain, has some monitoring mechanism for the oil spill, so it avoids future oil spill. I guess that's fine. We can try to put in some monitoring mechanism, some I don't know thing to monitor the oil spill. And they mentioned that the oil spill has also impacted the fishery industry, which is generated by the indigenous population. They want tighter restrictions. So they say many of the critics, however, are not rooted in I mean, they're not local communities, right? They are external. And this is an issue as well. Okay, so the issue, if we think about it, right, even in Singapore, when we complain about high real estate prices or HDB prices or generally real estate prices, right? A lot of us like to complain, oh, it's so high, it's so expensive to buy. Fine, that's a valid argument to say that it's expensive to buy. Now, the question is, if you are selling your property, wouldn't you want the market to be very high so you can sell for more? So when we complain that it's so high to buy, but then we want to sell our property for the highest price, aren't we contradicting ourselves? So this is just something I'd like to throw out there for you to think, right? In the sense that we might complain that this is bad, right? Or in this case, oh, the oil spill is so bad, it's going to damage the environment. But if we think about it, the oil industry is accounting for 25% of the government revenue. And this 25% of the government revenue would help to subsidize other things. And later in the case, they want healthcare and all the various services provided by the government. So if we just look at one side of the story, we are not capturing the entire flavor of the issue at hand. All right. So just now I mentioned that some groups mentioned, oh, we should have some monitoring mechanism, or even maybe not or divest the investment in oil. Like OH should divest investment in oil. But if you make such a statement, right, and not substantiate your arguments with varying perspective, then you are not capturing the flavor of the case. All right. So we need to consider the amount of revenue that is generated from this OH oil, and also consider the environmental aspect of extracting oil. Okay, so they also provide a bit of information on the pension funds. They talk about the active members. Let me just flip over. So they tell you how many active and inactive member. So naturally, I don't think many groups did this, but you should have actually brought up the idea of the defined benefit plan and the part on pension, where we talk about whether the pension fund is fully funded, partially funded, because I mean they mentioned about well funded, right? So we should mention something about, okay, yes, it might be relatively well funded, but we also know later in the case that there is an aging population. Why? Because the number of inactive seems pretty high, and number of pensioners is quite high, and the number of active could actually decrease over time. So those are some concerns that we need to bring forward in the discussion. And what is important to take note is that we are taking the position of the pension fund, and we have a legally binding mandate to the pensioner and the seasoned. So there is a requirement to at least meet the minimum return. So we are not, first of all, a government. So we're not taking the position of a government to provide social good to the seasoned and all. Yes, that might be part of our ESG unique plan or unique criteria, but at the end of the day, we need to focus on what is our purpose, and our mandate is towards the pensioners and the citizens, and to provide a minimum return. You see, they also mentioned that local unemployment has made OH public more conscious about economic impact of its investment strategy. So we really know that unemployment is on the rise. So if you mention in your strategy that we should divest the oil investments, that would be very incorrect, I would say, because you do not consider the unemployment that divestment would bring. So maybe what I'm trying to say here is that when we think about portfolio management, right, the idea that we are managing a portfolio means that we need to consider all aspects of the portfolio, not just, of course, economic component, but we need to consider everything, right? We should notice, really, we need to consider things like the economy. We need to bring in knowledge about things like Dutch disease, or like even your own personal knowledge about the Norwegian sovereign fund. So all these knowledge kind of contribute to your portfolio making decision or portfolio construction. And it's not simply just a very silo kind of like, okay, so we want ESG, we divest the oil asset, or we want more employment, then we try to improve the tourism. So if you just think of it like individually like this, then you're not incorporating the idea of portfolio into your answer. So when we think about divestment, we need to consider, okay, yes, I want to divest, but then if I divest slowly, so some groups mentioned I should divest my oil and gas industry slowly. Okay, fine, you don't divest slowly, but eventually you're going to divest, right? Meaning that people are going to lose their jobs. So how are you going to counteract the divestment of your oil and gas? So if we draw ideas from from Norway, we can say that, oh yes, we're going to divest our oil and gas and use the remaining time to invest the money that we have acquired from oil and gas into, let's say, the tourism industry, or let's say to develop the healthcare as healthcare industry, to bring it as like, tourism healthcare, right? Or healthcare tourism, in the sense people go to that country to seek medical treatment. So we need to bring in some counteracting kind of solutions when we suggest a divestment. So that's something I want to bring forward. At the end of the day, there is no right or wrong answer for this case, but we just need to bring a very compelling argument and not consider situations in silos, just divesting or just focusing on ESG or focusing on improving employment, etc. Right? Any questions so far? Any comments? Any clarifications that you'd like to seek? All right, we are okay. Okay, so this provides you with some information on its aim. So this will provide you information on IPS. As I mentioned, we need to craft an IPS before even do anything about asset allocation. Okay, so this will provide you information on IPS. Basically, the ESG considerations are your unique circumstances for IPS. So something I want to highlight here is this thing here. Yes, you want to divest away from oil and gas, but it has traditionally been the largest revenue generator for components of the economy. And I believe later in the case, what I recall is that the revenue generated from the oil and gas sector provides further revenue for other services that is being required to support the oil and gas sector. So meaning what? Like, for example, the restaurant businesses and all this all tap on the investments from oil and gas. That's why the restaurant business boom and everything. So there is a tagging kind of economic growth that's happening here simply because of the oil and gas. So we cannot simply just say we should divest oil and gas. All right, that's what I'm trying to impress on you, that we cannot just say we should divest oil and gas. So this is the hint here on the Norway pension fund, to look at actually this example. Because you see, they say it disposed of its oil and gas stock as a lead example. So actually this was a hint for you to find out, oh, actually, how did they divest away their oil and gas? And if you have done that, then you will have come knowledge. Okay, so we have all this fund overview, the various current asset allocation, direct investments, infrastructure, etc. I think most groups did the component on this pretty all right, pretty good on in terms of allocating. I want to highlight again that when we do asset allocation, we need to bring in the quantitative aspect as well. So some groups only focus on the qualitative, meaning that, oh, we want to make sure that there is X amount in real estate, X amount in mining, X amount in fixed income. Yes, okay, so we want to have a diversified portfolio. But can you substantiate your argument that by having, let's say, 5% in this, 10% in that, it will provide you with the required return that you want? So you need a quantitative aspect into your justification. So some groups missed out that quantitative aspect. And the thing about the quantitative aspect, because it's a group project, is that you have to go online to research, right? You need to find out, oh, this ETF usually provides how much returns. Then we need to calculate, first of all, the standard deviation portfolio, and we need to consider the correlation. So I think a good report will have considered the correlation metrics, and then we need to calculate the portfolio return, right? So portfolio return is not so tricky. We just need to do a percentage. I think some groups even consider various probabilities of the economy. So a boom economy, a normal economy, and bear economy. I mean, that is going back. So yeah, you need to consider all those in your answer for the asset allocation component. But remember that all these details on asset allocation only make sense if you have done your IPS, right? If you have defined what kind of risk you want, what kind of returns you want, what kind of time horizon you want. So everything needs to fall back on IPS again. So if you have no IPS, as in your answer did not talk about IPS at all, then whatever asset allocation that you suggest has very little purpose, because you do not know what you want at the end of the day. So again, this is like probably a broken record. I'm going to mention again, your IPS is very important. Okay, so we have some information on the companies that's being invested: North White Rose, Labrador Iron Ore, and they tell you what they do. Okay, the mining industry, they're facing some backlash because of the indigenous community, I mean, and then we have this thing about the Muskrat Ford infrastructure, which is supposed to be a green project, hydroelectricity, but then there are issues of flooding and the community being chased out. So these are some things that we need to consider. They did talk about having an airport to boost tourism. I think most of the groups did this very well, in the sense that you try to focus on saying, okay, tourism is something that the company can, or the country or the province can look at to boost and then some did mention about poisoning in the lake. Sorry. And then the thing about this is that how do you tackle this, right? The poisoning in the surrounding lake, the mercury poisoning. So we need to be able to thoroughly address this issue. Right, so all these are just more information about the type of investment. Nothing too exciting. We know there's some equity, there's some oil and gas ETF. I think most groups identify that this oil and gas ETF should be diversified away, because there's no reason to hold ETF that is from oil and gas if your purpose is to diversify away from the oil and gas industry, right? But it's direct investment in the mining and the oil extraction would have direct impact on the local population. So that one, we need to consider it in a more broad-based kind of issue, like how does it impact the local economy. But in terms of the ETF, yeah, we should actually just diversify away. We should just remove it from here. Okay, remove it from this portfolio. So you see, so they gave you basically all the various things, the codes and all. So actually what you had to do is to jump on Bloomberg or any Yahoo Finance, Yahoo Securities, and we need to check what is the returns for all these ETF, and from there we can find out what is the portfolio return based on the current portfolio. Any questions? Any queries that you'd like to ask about this part so far? Yeah, okay. All right. So as usual, if you have any questions, feel free to write in our group chat. So they did talk a bit on the global divestment movement. So this global is not for that company or that province. It did consider some divestment strategy of its fossil fuels. So these are more like ESG aspect. And I think one group that did very well actually read the slides on ESG that we did discuss today in advance, and they did mention some ESG investment styles, which I thought was very good. Okay, so I want to highlight here, this brings up the contentious issue of divestment, because we know that if they divest and they cannot find a buyer, what happens is that the project has to shut down. But the project is providing the government so much royalties, right? So much tax money. So it's very tricky. And then the thing is, if they manage to sell off their investments, then the money is going to external entity, which doesn't even benefit the local population. So it becomes very tricky. Like, what should you do? Of course, there is no right answer. It's how you justify what is best. And then, see, they tell you what's the impact of divestment on the economy, which is a good thing to find out, and then to use this information to justify your answer. So these are some very important information about impact of divestment on the tax implications. All right, so all these are just on the implications of this divestment. So we did have a bit of issue on this, where they tell you that, oh, the current political party is a bit hostile towards the indigenous communities, and there's a bit of like activism and all those that's happening here. So something that we can think of is the shareholder activism that we just talked about today, right? What's the impact of shareholder activism on the company, or on, for this case, in the pension fund? So they share with you some stakeholders. You have your government, taxpayer, pensioners. So these are more of the people involved, the indigenous community. All right, so I believe everyone has read this, but what's interesting here is this part here. So going down, right, there's this whole very long discussion about board members. All right, I think one or two groups did this portion very well, in the sense that, remember, throughout the whole, or almost every single lecture that we did on portfolio management, we always talk about this thing called psychological bias, right? And then we talk about anchoring, confirmation bias. survivorship bias. I think we talked about it last lecture. So in every single portfolio management category, there's always certain psychological bias that will happen simply because we're humans, right? So I want to highlight to you that whenever a case gives you so much detail about individuals, in this case, the board members here, we will need to bring out the idea of biases and how their background could bias their decisions. Because remember, see, at the end of the day, right, they're supposed to make a decision. The board's supposed to make a decision and all those, right? So we need to think about psychological bias. So unfortunately, not all the groups did that, and that's why you probably won't be able to get the marks here. But all this whole big chunk is all about biases that we need to identify, right? So what kind of bias they have. So I want to highlight that, yeah, in your finals, if you see information about individuals, right? For example, or he worked here and all those things, immediately think about biases and how his experiences in whatever role will impact his decision making because of his psychological bias. All right. Okay. So actually, that's all. I want to ask whether there are any questions. I would like to answer any questions, comments on this case. I think that will be more useful. At the same time, if there are any questions regarding what we have gone through so far. So the bias can be any part of the report. It can be because you see at the end of the day, right? The purpose is that you are supposed to recommend a proposal for the board meeting, right? So the bias can be in just a separate component. Let's say before you talk about asset allocation strategy, the actual allocating the asset, you can just mention about all the various bias that the board members could have in impacting the decisions. So of course, like you see here, this one, some of it is very obvious. Of course, if you can mention every single person, what bias they have, that's the best. If let's say, oh, you're running out of time in exam, you just want to mention a few, that's fine too, because you have not enough time, just mention a few. Like for example, this one can be very obvious, right? This person is is part of the indigenous community, and then he basically has some invested interest, right, in the to support the protection of his ancestral land. Okay, that's a good question. Other than portfolio return and correlation, what other possible calculation equation that could be used? In terms of strategic asset allocation, those basically we are looking at the risk and return. So those are the main ones. We can use the Sharpe ratio. Remember, we talked about Sharpe ratio, but when we talk about Sharpe ratio, that was more on the appraisal of the portfolio. So the Sharpe ratio gives the risk and return rewards. I think some groups use the Sharpe ratio, which is good. So it gives you the returns per risk taken, right? We can use that, but more of the appraisal side, whether portfolio is doing well. There are are other quantitative methods, but that's more, I'm still thinking more of the appraisal side. Whenever we talk about the attribution, and then we talk about how we can divide the results in terms of pure sector allocation, interaction, or pure weight allocation. So those are the kind of like quantitative aspect that you will still need to know. Then we talk about, remember, Jensen alpha and all those. So those are the quantitative aspect that we need to consider. But in terms of asset allocation, no, I think that's the main thing is about the returns and rewards. Actually, I think one of the group did the solver and modern portfolio theory in Python. Yeah, I think one group did that, and that was very good. I think that was very good, which shows the various portfolio that they created and how they are trying to choose the tangency portfolio. So that's possible to, of course, in exam that will never ever be tested. As in asking you to create the modern portfolio theory and all this, they can ask you, they can test you in different ways. But yeah, that one, I mean, if you've done it, it was very good too. Yeah, you can do that. Okay. Any other questions regarding the case? So this is the overview again of the things to think about. Yeah. All right. So for the benefit of that for those that do not have any questions, I guess we are done for this module. Of course, there's more questions. Yeah, happy to answer. Okay, so where would capital market expectation apply? Okay, so capital market expectation will apply here at step 2 here. So capital market expectation. So once you do your IPS, then you talk about what's your capital market expectation. And in the case study, I think the main thing you need to bring up is that the oil prices are falling, right? And because of the falling oil price, and because the province really depend on the oil, they will be impacted by the falling oil prices. And so you need to just mention a bit on, first of all, how do they tackle this issue in terms of risk management, and also forecast. Maybe you can say something like, oh, if the oil price continue to fall, how could this also impact your rebalancing of the portfolio? Because remember, as your oil price fall, most likely your stock price for the various for which one, the your north white rows, right, would likely fall as well. So you need to do rebalancing in that sense. So the capital market expectation can be related to forming your rebalancing strategy, and also how you allocate your assets. So the market expectation, capital market expectation, let's say, can impact your risk management strategy. So you might consider some protective options strategy, like the protective put, or or you should do a swap or cross default swap. So you can recommend a cross default swap on north white rows, meaning that you suspect north white rows might go into default situation. So you purchase a cross default swap so that in case they go to the default situation because of the falling oil prices, your portfolio will be protected. So you can suggest that. Of course, with the substantiation that you have expectation that the price continue to fall, and to protect your investments or your pensioners' money, you want to buy a cross default swap. So that would bring in market expectation and risk management. So that's how you implement like the knowledge that you have acquired. All right. So remember, so far, at the end of the day, all this discussion is about providing you the tools, and then how you implement it. The tools is on your own discretion. Okay. So the different tools that for forming your market, capital market expectation, that one, in a sense, it's a bit, you can't really do that in this case, because usually the various tools, right, for forming capital market expectation is based on like historical data and everything, right? We talk about like doing a regression and these kind of things. So it might not be so relevant, but how they could test you in like that aspect, it could be just like a sub point in the question. So they really give you information to use the statistical tools to do it, to do the calculations. And the thing about, I think your finals is that, first of all, it's open book. And I believe it's also, you can use your laptops, which make it a little tougher because it means that you can use Excel, at least Excel, and then they might get you to do some calculations, right? Like some calculations on Excel. So yeah, you need to know how to do that on Excel. So like the statistical tools, right, for market expectation, I believe those will be very direct questions or sub-part questions. So they really give you like just, so not like a big case like what we have seen. It's just like, okay, I tell you what are the numbers and everything, then I want you to use whatever method, right, that we have learned, the Singa Taga method, approach and all those, right? Or like the CAPM approach and all those. So those will be very specific. I believe those questions are very specific and not like such a broad case. So maybe just to just talk a little more about the various securities. I think it'd be generally quite good to put in your answer whenever there's inflation. Try to talk a bit on like bonds linked to inflation, because inflation is always an issue, right? So if we need to tackle inflation, try to suggest having a inflation linked bond which help you protect against inflation. That'll be useful because there's always an issue. Of course, if you have certain market perspective on default, try to suggest a default swap. If you are also familiar with insurance. So insurance is a good way to protect against black swan events, as you know, like accidents and stuff. So you can buy credit insurance. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that there are a lot of methods that you can use that can be out of even this cost. But if you know it, you can just write it, right? And of course, you must justify it and make sense and all. So you can actually do write it. So yeah. So any more questions before I think we'll end today's lecture? And it was a nice great 6 weeks teaching all of you. I hope you have learned something from this module that is more than applicable for final exam, but more for even your life or even investments, and more importantly, when you study, as in when you work the industry, right? You might not want to be a portfolio manager at the end, but I hope that the ideas that we talk about gives you more perspective in even managing your own portfolio, meaning managing your own wealth, right? Remember the first discussion that we had way back in lecture 2 or lecture 1, we talked a lot about how we should invest, right? We talked about whether REITs are good, whether we should buy liquidity, the issue of liquidity, whether we should invest our money in the house because illiquid. So I think all these are very applicable to your own life as well. Whether buying ETF is a good idea, what kind of where you should buy an ETF, right? Should you buy on Moomoo and all that? So I hope all these are applicable and you see the usefulness in the concepts more than just for the exams. All right, so I'll end it off here. If you have any other questions, feel free to stay. Let me just pause the recording. I think